Welcome again, brothers and sisters, and thank you for joining us. Our focus in our last lesson was on the sins of the congregation committed in ignorance. This was a corporate responsibility before God, and we discoursed that God judges nations, and many people who did not participate in the sin of the nation are judged along with it. Likewise, we too will be judged along with the church or congregations we identify ourselves with. We then look at the sacrifice on behalf of the sins of the ruler and of the common people. The final area we looked at was the law of the sin offering. The most important takeaway lesson from all that we have discussed is the gift of Jesus as sacrificial offering for whatever sins an individual or a community commits. His blood washes us, forgives us, and redeems us unto God. As we halt here on our summary, I extend a warm welcome to you again, brothers and sisters, and I hope you'll be blessed as you join us.
Greetings, dear friend. This is Through the Bible. Once again, a warm welcome to you for joining us in this great opportunity. We have this great time together to study the book of Leviticus. We've been looking at the book of Leviticus. We've completed 4 chapters, a lot of offerings and sacrifices, blood and gore, but it just gives us a better understanding of what Christ did for us on that cross. Here in chapter 5, we are talking about the trespass offering. The theme is this trespass offering, then the specific acts of sin committed in ignorance, and then non-specific acts of sin committed again in ignorance. Some expositors treat the first 13 verses of this chapter as part of the sin offering. There is ample justification for this, as the word trespass in verses 6 and 7 can be translated as guilt, and should be for his guilt. In verses 6 and 7, then 9 and 11, the sin offering is required for the trespass because the act of sin is caused by the nature of sin. All sin comes from the same source, the sin nature. You and I inherited it from Adam. The axe must be laid at the root as well as at the fruit. In our discussion here, we shall treat the entire chapter as the trespass offering. The word trespass has very much the same meaning in the King James translation as it does in our present-day use of the word. We all understand a no trespassing sign. It means we are not to invade the rights of others. Liberty is a word which is very much misused and abused today. Many people go around parading, burning things, destroying things, and talking about liberty. Friend, you are free to swing your fist in any direction that you please, but your liberty ends where my nose begins. A trespass is the invasion of the rights of either God or man. For example, withholding tithes from God was counted a trespass in Israel. We have the example of Achan who took the accursed thing, and this was considered a trespass. Joshua chapter 7 verse 1. We must always remember that our trespasses arise out of our sin nature. Man is totally depraved and actually has no capacity for God whatsoever. God makes it very clear that he cannot and will not accept the works of unsaved men to accomplish their salvation. Their righteousness, however good it appears, at least in our perspective, from God's perspective, it is as filthy as rags. He does not save by works of righteousness, but He saves us by His grace. It is impossible for an unsaved man to please God. Because, as it says in Romans 8:7, because the carnal mind is enmity against God, for it is not subject to the law of God, neither indeed can be. When Jesus was on this earth, a lot of people came to Him with this question. Then they said unto Him, What shall we do, that we might work the works of God? Jesus answered and said unto them, This is the work of God, that ye believe on Him whom He hath sent. John 6:28 and 29. The apostles had the same answer. Acts 16:31, believe on the Lord Jesus Christ, and thou shalt be saved. This section here now talks about the specific acts of sin committed in ignorance. The list of sins enumerated here is obviously not an exhaustive list, but gives us examples of a limitless number which could be named. These are sins of individuals, the entire congregation. Most of the section deals with the remedy and not the disease. So we find the emphasis is upon the type of offering and not on the character of the offerer, as it was in the sin offering. Now let's read verse 1 of chapter 5. And if a soul sin, and hear the voice of swearing, and is a witness whether he had seen or known of it, if he do not utter it, then he shall bear his iniquity. Now let me say again that the 4 specific sins listed here are merely examples. I think one could fill up the rest of the book of Leviticus with specific sins if we had named them all. Now one preacher came up with a list of 800 specific sins that he had thought of. He was swamped with letters from people who wanted the list of sins. They thought maybe there was something they were missing since they couldn't think of 800 sins. Well, here we are just given a few examples. Now here it says, if a soul sin, and hear the voice of swearing. Now could be better translated as, if a person sin in this respect, that he hears the voice of adjuration. Now it has to do with the hearing of an oath and being a witness. Now if a witness has seen or knows something, but then he withholds the truth to the detriment of some other individual, then that is a sin of omission. There are sins of omission today. Some people come to church today thinking their hands are clean because they haven't murdered or stolen. Listen to what James says. Therefore to him that knoweth to do good, and doeth it not, to him it is sin. James 4:17. Solomon also prayed to God concerning this very issue of not telling the truth when a witness ought to tell the truth. It says in 1 Kings 8 verses 31 to 32, if any man trespass against his neighbor, and an oath be laid upon him to cause him to swear, and the oath come before thine altar in this house, then hear thou in heaven, and do and judge thy servants, condemning the wicked to bring his way upon his head, and justifying the righteous to give him according to his righteousness. Now let me give you an example of this. The town gossip is crossing the square of the town, and this dear lady sees the president of the bank crossing the street. Now his secretary is also leaving the bank to go to lunch, and then a car hits her as she is crossing the street. The bank president rushes over and picks her up in his arms and takes her to the doctor's office. Then the gossip runs to the telephone to call the wife of the bank president and says, do you know, I saw your husband with another woman in his arms. Now, although that was a fact, it wasn't the whole truth. What is she doing here? She is withholding important information. Now that is a sin of omission. Vernon McGee talks about a meeting of Christian men, and they were talking about the pastor. And they gave certain information that was accurate, but it wasn't the whole truth, definitely. They told only a part of it. They didn't tell the whole situation. They were actually willing to let that group of men believe that they had heard the whole story. Now that is a trespass. It is one of the most vicious sins that can be committed. Notice here that it is number 1 on God's sin parade. Over in the book of Proverbs, we find a list of things which God hates. And in that list of 7, we find a lying tongue. Proverbs chapter 6, verse 17. You remember that Jesus was quiet during most of his trial. We are told that he held his peace. But when he was put under oath, he broke his silence. Then he was no longer dumb like a sheep before her shearers is dumb. And the high priest answered and said unto him, I adjure thee by the living God, that thou tell us whether thou be the Christ, the Son of God. Jesus saith unto him, Thou hast said. Nevertheless I say unto you, hereafter shall ye see the Son of Man sitting on the right hand of power and coming in the clouds of heaven. Matthew chapter 26, 63 to 64. You see, under oath, he did not hold his peace, but spoke out in witness. He told the whole truth. Verse 2, Or if a soul touch any unclean thing, whether it be a carcass of an unclean beast, or a carcass of an unclean cattle, or the carcass of unclean creeping things, and if it be hidden from him, he also shall be unclean and guilty. This is the law concerning uncleanness. A man might become polluted by contact with any dead animals, without being aware of it, while others witnessed it. A dead carcass caused uncleanness by contact. Why? Why, probably just for health reasons. Now, this also speaks of us believers. We can't be out in the world without becoming unclean by seeing things and hearing things and thinking things. Yes, we are unclean. Just switching from one channel to the other. These images come at such rapid paces. Sometimes a simple ad and you have become unclean. We may not even realize that we have come into contact with the unclean. Sometimes we become immune to it. It may be hidden from us, so we are not even aware of it. But we are not to rush into God's presence until we are cleansed. This is why the psalmist says, Psalm 19 verse 12, Who can understand his errors? Cleanse thou me from secret faults. We should not only pray for forgiveness in general. We are to name our specific failures to God and ask Him for forgiveness. But more than that, we should pray for forgiveness of sins that we may be unaware of. And a lot of times we are unclean and we don't even realize it. That's something which has to be dealt with whether we like it or not. For if he touch the uncleanness of man, this is verse 3, whatsoever uncleanness it be that a man shall be defiled withal, and it be hid from him, when he knoweth of it, then he shall be guilty. Now this is similar to the case of the unclean animal, yet God makes a distinction between man and beast. The penalty for this is more severe than for touching the beast. Apparently there were other distinctions of uncleanness concerning man other than death. Or if a soul swear, pronouncing with his lips to do evil or to do good, whatsoever it be that a man shall pronounce with an oath, and it be hid from him, when he knoweth of it, then he shall be guilty in one of these. Careless speech is involved in this instance. Sometimes we promise to do something and then we don't. We promise that we will serve the Lord. Now Jephthah is an example, a perfect example of a man promising to do something but was very rash. And he ended up offering his daughter. Then there's Simon Peter, who declared that he would not deny Christ, but would die defending him. And you know the story. Today I hear people, we hear a lot of people making some very rash promises. In fact, I think some of our songs are dynamite, to tell the truth. In our songs, we promise to give all to Him, all to Jesus I surrender. We sing songs like to follow Him, to die for Him. Think about it. We sing them so glibly that we don't even know what we are singing. Also, I think it is careless speech and presumptuous when we try to demand of God an answer to our prayers. We need always to remember that our prayers are to be in accordance with His will. If we ask anything according to His will, He heareth us. Where did we get the idea that we could demand anything of God? Then he shall be guilty in one of these. Now this refers to the 4 things which have been listed. Many more could have been included. Verses 5 and 6. And it shall be, when he shall be guilty in one of these things, that he shall confess that he hath sinned in that thing. And he shall bring his trespass offering unto the Lord for his sin which he hath sinned, a female from the flock, a lamb, or a kid of the goats, for a sin offering. And the priest shall make an atonement for him concerning his sin. Confession is commanded for the first time. The other offerings were an open admission of guilt. This one has to do with secret sins. They were hidden sins, even though they be against God and man. You remember in Joshua chapter 7, when Achan took the wedge of gold and the Babylonish garment, the trespass had to be dealt with publicly because it was that kind of a sin. The laying on of hands in the other offerings was evidently an admission of sin. Here, confession must come first. Then the offering. In the sweet savor offerings, the offerings preceded any thought of confession. The opposite is true here. I think this is what our Lord had in mind in the Sermon on the Mount. It says in Matthew 5:23-24, listen carefully, Therefore, if thou bring thy gift to the altar, and there rememberest that thy brother hath aught against thee, leave there thy gift before the altar, and go thy way. First be reconciled to thy brother, and then come and offer thy gift. The believer today is to confess his sin to God privately, but he is to make restitution to the injured party. The trespass offering simply means the offering of guilt. It was a sin offering, since all sin stems from the sin nature. We are not sinners because we sin. We sin because we are sinners with a sin nature. Since this offering is for an act of sin, which is one of the many facets of the sin nature, the value of the offering was not as great as the value of the sin offering in chapter 4. And if he be not able to bring a lamb, when he shall bring for his trespass, which he hath committed, 2 turtle doves, or 2 young pigeons unto the Lord, one for a sin offering and the other for a burnt offering. This is Leviticus chapter 5 verse 7. The emphasis in the trespass offering is not in the character or position of the offerer, but in the sacrifice itself. 2 turtle doves were required, as one was for a sin offering and one was for a burnt offering. The person and the work of Christ are represented in the poorest of offerings. This was the sacrifice of the poor. Christ preached glad tidings to the poor. Notice that it is labeled a sin offering because it arises from the sin nature. And he shall bring them unto the priest, who shall offer that which is for the sin offering first, and wring off his head from his neck, but shall not divide it asunder. And he shall sprinkle of the blood of the sin offering upon the side of the altar, and the rest of the blood shall be wrung out at the bottom of the altar. It is a sin offering. Leviticus chapter 5 verses 8 and 9. Blood must be shed, though the head of the bird was not removed from the body. Verse 10, And he shall offer the second for a burnt offering according to the manner, and the priest shall make an atonement for him for his sin which he had sinned, and it shall be forgiven him. The sinner has complete forgiveness even with the little bird. All of this points to Christ as the one sacrifice. Verse 11, But if he be not able to bring 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, then he that sinned shall bring for his offering the 10th part of an ephah of fine flour for a sin offering. He shall put no oil upon it, neither shall he put any frankincense thereon, for it is a sin offering. The poorest of the poor was not left out. If one could not bring a bird, he could bring what amounted to a piece of bread. This sacrifice was still a substitute for him. Then shall he bring it to the priest, And the priest shall take his handful of it, even a memorial thereof, and burn it on the altar, according to the offerings made by fire unto the Lord. It is a sin offering. And the priest shall make an atonement for him as touching his sin, that he had sinned in one of these, and it shall be forgiven him. And the remnant shall be the priest's as a meat offering. Now let's move on to the section which talks about non-specific acts of sin committed in ignorance. Leviticus 5:14-16. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, If a soul commit a trespass, and sin through ignorance in the holy things of the Lord, then he shall bring for his trespass unto the Lord a ram without blemish out of the flocks, with thy estimation by shekels of silver, after the shekel of the sanctuary, for a trespass offering. And he shall make amends for the harm that he hath done in the holy thing, and shall add the 5th part thereto, and give it unto the priest. And the priest shall make an atonement for him with the ram of the trespass offering, and it shall be forgiven him. These trespass offerings emphasize the fact that there has been an invasion of the rights of both God and man. Harm to others is the feature which requires that reparation had to be performed. The principle had to be restored, plus a 5th part. This must be what Zacchaeus had in mind when he told the Lord that he would give half of his goods to the poor and restore fourfold what he had taken from any man by false accusation. The chief wrong committed through ignorance seems to apply to robbing God in connection with tithes and offerings. You'll find this again in Malachi. It says in Malachi chapter 3 verses 8 and 9, Will a man rob God? Yet ye have robbed me. But ye say, Wherein have we robbed thee? In tithes and offerings. Ye are cursed with a curse, for ye have robbed me, even this whole nation. The Lord promises them blessing if they will bring their tithes, such blessing that there shall not be room to receive it. Ecclesiastes 5:5 warns, Better is it that thou shouldst not vow than that thou shouldst vow and not pay. For this kind of neglect, this trespass against God, the offering must be valuable. It must be a ram. This points us to Christ, who is precious. But with the precious blood of Christ, as of a lamb without blemish and without spot. 1 Peter 1:19. Through this offering there was forgiveness for the sinner who committed the trespass in ignorance. Leviticus 5:17-19. And if a soul sin and commit any of these things which are forbidden to be done by the commandments of the Lord, though he wist it not, yet is he guilty and shall bear his iniquity. And he shall bring a ram without blemish out of the flock, with thy estimation for a trespass offering, unto the priest, and the priest shall make an atonement for him concerning his ignorance, wherein he erred and wist it not, and it shall be forgiven him. It is a trespass offering. He had certainly trespassed against the Lord. This apparently had to do with breaking any of the commandments of God in ignorance. Ignorance of the law is no excuse. This is also true in civil law. In spite of the lack of knowledge of the commandment, the offender was guilty and was held liable. Here again the ram is given as the only animal for the trespass offering. This offering in its ritual followed the pattern of the sin offering, except in the sprinkling of the blood, which followed the pattern of the burnt and peace offering. We will see this in more detail in chapter 7.
Dear friends, we have often heard the phrase, ignorance is bliss. But it doesn't quite look like so after our study today. Well, not at least in totality. We have seen today that sin, even done in ignorance or rash, still is sin before God and invites necessary atonement. God is not going to forgive us just because we tell him that we are not aware of the rules. All these, brothers and sisters, call for careful consideration of everything we say or do. Now, one part of our study that stuck right in my mind was the notion that these laws deal with just the remedy and not the disease. Right there is the hard, crucial lesson. And in the later part of Israel's existence, God promised his children that it will no longer be God's laws in the stones, but in the heart. Advantageously, we also have the Holy Spirit of God who can keep us from sinning. And today, I pray that he will inhabit your hearts even as you invite him. Peace be upon you.